Have you ever looked at someone and decided who they were before they spoke a single word? Most people have, and sometimes that one mistake changes everything. The courtroom was unusually crowded that morning. People whispered to one another while waiting for the next case to begin. Some expected another routine property dispute. Others simply wanted entertainment. No one imagined they were about to witness a story that would leave the entire room in stunned silence. Then the courtroom doors opened. An elderly man stepped inside. He leaned on an old wooden cane, moving slowly, one careful step at a time. His gray military jacket looked as though it had survived decades of harsh winters. The metals once attached to it had left faded outlines on the fabric. His shoes were worn. His hands trembled slightly, and his face carried the quiet exhaustion of a man who had lived through more than most people could imagine. A few people exchanged amused glances. One man quietly whispered, "He doesn't stand a chance." Another shook his head. "This case will be over in 10 minutes." Across the courtroom stood the defendant, Richard Calloway, a wealthy businessman with a perfectly tailored suit, an expensive watch, and the confident smile of someone who believed money could solve every problem. Two experienced attorneys stood beside him, surrounded by neatly organized files and polished confidence. Richard didn't even look at the old veteran. To him, this was already over. I walked into the courtroom and took my seat. "Good morning," I said. The room immediately fell silent. I glanced at both sides. One elderly veteran, one millionaire developer. Something about the atmosphere felt unusual. Years on the bench had taught me to trust that feeling. I looked toward the plaintiff. "Sir, please state your name." The old man slowly stood. "My name is Samuel Carter." His voice was calm, steady, respectful. "I served this country for 36 years. No dramatic speech, no attempt to gain sympathy, just facts." I nodded. "Mr. Carter, why are you bringing this case today?" Samuel looked directly at Richard for several seconds before answering. His eyes held neither hatred nor fear, only disappointment. "I'm not here because someone stole my land." The courtroom became completely still. "I'm here because someone stole the truth." Several spectators looked at each other. Richard's lawyer smiled confidently. One of them quietly laughed. Judge Judy raised an eyebrow. "That's a powerful statement, Mr. Carter." Samuel nodded. "I've waited 42 years to say those words." 42 years. The number echoed through the courtroom. Richard finally looked up. For the first time, his confident smile faded ever so slightly. I turned toward the defense. "Mr. Calloway, your response?" Richard stood confidently. "Your Honor, this case is nothing more than a desperate attempt to claim property that legally belongs to my family." He pointed toward Samuel. "This man has no proof. My family purchased that land decades ago. The documents are legal. The ownership is unquestionable." His attorney stepped forward. "We have certified records, tax documents, property transfers, and every legal requirement necessary to dismiss this case immediately." Everything sounded organized, professional, convincing, but experience had taught me something. Sometimes, the strongest looking case hides the weakest truth. I turned back toward Samuel. "Do you have evidence supporting your claim?" The courtroom held its breath. Samuel remained silent. 5 seconds passed, then 10. Even his own silence seemed to make the room uncomfortable. Finally, he slowly placed his cane against the table. Then, without saying a word, he rolled up the sleeve of his right arm. The spectators frowned in confusion. Richard's lawyers exchanged puzzled looks. I watched carefully. Long scars stretched across Samuel's forearm. Old scars, deep scars, not the kind caused by ordinary accidents. One spectator quietly whispered, "Those look like war injuries." Samuel gently touched one of the scars. "I received these while protecting people I had never met." His voice never rose. "I never asked for recognition. I never asked for money. But I expected honesty." The courtroom remained silent. Then Samuel reached into the inside pocket of his faded military jacket. Richard's attorney immediately objected. "Your Honor, unless counsel has already disclosed whatever he's producing, This shouldn't be admitted. I raised a hand. Sit down. Samuel carefully removed not a folder, not a photograph, not a contract, a small weathered envelope. The paper had yellowed with age. Its corners were worn. The handwriting across the front had nearly faded away. Samuel held it carefully, almost as if it were more valuable than gold. I've protected this for 42 years. Richard's face changed, only for a second, but I noticed. His attorney noticed. And perhaps most importantly, Samuel noticed. What is it? I asked. Samuel looked down at the envelope. It contained something a very powerful family hoped would never be seen again. The courtroom erupted into whispers. I struck the gavel. Order! The room quieted. Richard leaned toward his attorney and whispered urgently. The attorney's confident smile disappeared. That alone caught my attention. If the envelope meant nothing, why did it suddenly make them nervous? I looked at Samuel again. Open it. Samuel's hands trembled, not from fear, from age. Very slowly, he unfolded the brittle paper inside. Before he could speak, Richard's attorney jumped to his feet. Objection! His voice was louder than before. We request an immediate recess. I stared at him. You haven't even seen the document. He hesitated, then answered, We believe it may be irrelevant. Interesting. How could he know that? Without knowing what it was. The courtroom sensed the same thing. People shifted in their seats. Whispers spread again. Richard no longer looked relaxed. A small drop of sweat rolled down the side of his face. For the first time since entering the courtroom, the millionaire looked worried. I folded my hands. Mr. Carter, what exactly is inside that envelope? Samuel slowly lifted his eyes. The room became completely silent. His next sentence would change everything. It's the original letter, written by Richard Calloway's own father, the night before he disappeared. And in that instant, every person in the courtroom realized this case had never really been about land. It was about a secret someone had spent 4 decades trying to bury. The courtroom remained perfectly still. No one moved. No one even seemed willing to breathe. The old envelope rested in Samuel Carter's trembling hands as though it carried the weight of an entire lifetime. Across the room, Richard Calloway's confidence had vanished. His attorneys exchanged nervous glances. I had seen thousands of people stand before my bench. Some lied, some exaggerated, some cried to win sympathy. But there was one reaction that always caught my attention. Fear. Real fear. And for the first time that morning, I saw it in Richard Calloway's eyes. I leaned forward. Mr. Carter, open the letter. Samuel carefully unfolded the brittle paper. The edges crackled as if the document itself had grown old, waiting for this moment. Before reading a single word, he closed his eyes. For a few seconds, he wasn't standing in my courtroom anymore. He was remembering another place, another time, another promise, 42 years earlier. I was 39 years old, Samuel began. I had just returned home after my final military deployment. My wife had passed away 2 years earlier. My son had moved across the country. I thought the hardest days of my life were behind me. He paused. I was wrong. The spectators listened without making a sound. I bought a small piece of farmland outside town. It wasn't worth millions back then. It was simply home. I planned to spend the rest of my life there. He smiled faintly. I planted apple trees with my own hands. I built the fence myself. I even repaired the old barn every spring. His voice softened. It wasn't land. It was my future. Several people in the audience lowered their eyes. They could almost picture the peaceful life he described. Then Samuel continued. One evening, a black sedan pulled into my driveway. 3 men stepped out. They wore expensive suits. They weren't farmers. They weren't neighbors. They were businessmen. One of Richard's attorneys shifted uncomfortably. Samuel looked directly at him. They offered to buy my property. I politely refused. They doubled the offer. I refused again. Then they stopped smiling. The courtroom grew even quieter. They told me the land would belong to them. Whether I sold it or not, I turned toward Richard. Did your family attempt to purchase Mr. Carter's property? Richard straightened his tie. My father negotiated with hundreds of landowners. I don't know every conversation he ever had. His answer sounded rehearsed. Samuel nodded slowly. I expected you to say that. Then he looked back at me. 3 months later, I came home and found bulldozers on my property. My fence was gone. My trees had been cut down. My house had been marked for demolition. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. I called the police. They showed up. They looked around. And then they told me the workers had valid ownership papers. Samuel lowered his head. I knew those papers were fake. Richard's attorney immediately stood. Objection. Mr. Carter is making accusations without proof. I raised a hand. Sit down. He reluctantly obeyed. I turned back to Samuel. You said you knew the documents were fake. Why? Samuel slowly lifted the letter. Because the man who created them confessed. The courtroom erupted into whispers. Richard's breathing became heavier. I noticed him quietly rubbing his palms together beneath the table. People only did that when they were desperately trying to hide anxiety. Samuel unfolded another corner of the letter. The confession wasn't written by a stranger. It was written by Richard Calloway's father. Silence. Complete silence. Samuel began reading. Samuel, if you're reading this, I've waited too long. I let greedy men convince me to destroy the life of an honest soldier. The property records were changed. The signatures were forged. The county clerk accepted money. Every sentence struck the courtroom like thunder. One spectator covered her mouth. Another quietly whispered, "My God!" Richard shot to his feet. "That's fake," his voice cracked. "It has to be fake." Samuel calmly folded the letter. I haven't finished. Richard's attorney hurried toward him. Sit down. But Richard ignored the advice. He's lying. My father would never write something like that. I looked directly at Richard. Mr. Calloway, sit. He slowly lowered himself back into his chair. But the damage had already been done. The entire courtroom had seen him panic. Samuel continued reading. I wanted to tell the truth years ago. Every time I tried, someone reminded me how much money was involved. I chose silence. That silence became my greatest shame. The courtroom was silent again. Even the attorneys had stopped taking notes. I had one question. Mr. Carter, if you've had this letter for 42 years, why wait until now? Samuel looked down at his weathered hands. I made a promise. A dying man's promise. He swallowed hard. I promised Richard's father that I would never reveal the letter while his wife was alive. The audience exchanged confused looks. Samuel continued. She passed away 6 months ago. I kept my word. I've never broken a promise, not in the military, not in my family, and not in this courtroom. His words carried more weight than any dramatic speech ever could. Richard stared at the table. His jaw tightened. His attorneys looked less certain than when the hearing had begun. But something still didn't make sense. I looked at Samuel. This letter is powerful, but one handwritten confession doesn't automatically decide a property dispute. Samuel smiled. It was the first genuine smile of the day. I know that. That's why I didn't come here with only a letter. The room instantly became alert. Richard looked up, slowly, carefully, as if he already feared the answer. Samuel reached inside his military jacket once again. This time, he didn't remove another envelope. He removed a small brass key attached to an old military keychain. He placed it gently on the evidence table. The metal reflected the courtroom lights. I frowned. What does that key open? Samuel looked directly at Richard, then back at me. A safety deposit box. And inside that box? He paused just long enough for every heartbeat in the courtroom to feel louder. Are the original land deeds, bank transfer records, and a signed audio transcript that names every person who participated in the fraud. Richard's face turned completely pale. One of his attorneys whispered just loudly enough for those closest to hear. He actually found it. At that moment, I realized this trial was no longer about an old piece of farmland. It was becoming an investigation into a decades old conspiracy, and if what Samuel had just claimed was true, the next witness wouldn't simply change this case. It could destroy one of the most powerful families in the county. The courtroom clock ticked loudly as the bailiff walked back through the doors. In his hands, a sealed evidence case. Inside it was everything Samuel Carter had waited 42 years to reveal. Every eye followed the case as it was placed on the evidence table. No one spoke. Not Richard, not his attorneys, not even the spectators. I broke the silence. Mr. Carter, is this the box? Samuel slowly nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The bailiff carefully broke the official seal and opened the case. Inside were several aging folders, a bundle of canceled bank checks, original land survey maps, and a small cassette tape labeled only with one date, October 14th, 42 years ago. Richard suddenly stood up. Your Honor, I object! His voice was louder than it had been all day. We haven't verified the authenticity of any of this evidence. I looked directly at him. You'll have every opportunity to challenge it. But first, I intend to see what's inside. The courtroom became silent once again. Samuel reached for the first folder. His hands trembled, not with fear, with anticipation. He opened it carefully. The very first page carried an official county seal. Beneath it, a signature. Samuel pointed at it. This is the document they used to steal my property. Then he placed another document beside it. This is the original. Gasps echoed throughout the courtroom. Even without expert analysis, the differences were obvious. Different signatures, different dates, different parcel numbers. Richard's attorney quietly lowered his head. For the first time, he looked uncertain, but Samuel wasn't finished. He slowly picked up the old cassette tape. Holding it in both hands, he looked toward me. I've never played this for anyone, not even my own son. The courtroom froze. Richard's face turned completely pale. He whispered something under his breath that no one could hear. I nodded toward the bailiff. Do we still have the evidence tape recorder? The bailiff answered immediately. Yes, Your Honor. Within seconds, an old recorder was placed on the evidence table.